In this video, we're going to talk about the census, but we're going to talk in particularly how the U.S. Census is used in mapping. When it comes to mapping people, the United States Census, especially in the U.S., the United States Census is just a resource of information. So we want to understand a little bit about how the census protects the privacy of people, the citizens of the United States, without compromising the ability to map out trends that we see in society. So here's the logo for the 2010 census. So every 10 years, there's a major census in the United States that's sent out to every single household. This is known as the decennial census, and it's actually mandated by Article 1, Section 2 United States Constitution. And the reason why they do the census is to count the people in order to divide up representation in Congress and also to manage taxes. And this is done every 10 years. So every 10 years you're going to see changes in congressional districts. This is what leads to like the ideas of gerrymandering or trying to change the congressional districts in order to benefit the party in power. Also, states that gain population might gain congressional seats. States that lose populations will lose congressional seats. So this can change the political landscape drastically from the census. So each household would get a form like this. The head of household will fill out the form, how many people live there. They would give some information, racial demographic information, some age information, so forth. And this is known as like the short form census that's just mailed to you. Every household in the United States is supposed to fill this out because the goal of the census is to count every single person of the United States. For in between the decennial census, the U.S. Census has a program called the American Community Survey, and ACS, as it's known, does more than just count people. It'll also have other kinds of informations, so many different kinds of social economic informations, and so you can actually map out tons of different kinds of variables within the population, which is really cool. So how does the census work? Well, all those information that's collected by the census at the household level is then aggregated up to different geographic regions. The smallest geographic unit that's used is called the census block, and you can see it here at the bottom of this hierarchy. It's pretty high resolution. In the United States, there's about, in 2010 census, there was about 11 million blocks. Blocks are typically bounded by streets, roads, creeks, and in cities. In rural areas, they might use other features like rivers or train tracks, so forth. And blocks vary in size because they're really defined geographically. These blocks are then grouped into block groups. That's like the middle, the second highest resolution. And typically block groups, they try to make them have a population between 600 and 3,000 people, and it's collected by the block groups. Those block groups, then you can you group a few of them together, and then they'll show up as a census tract. Census tract is very popular terminology when talking about the census, because census tract represents the smallest territorial unit which population data is available for most counties, for many countries, and especially in the United States. The census tract is going to be the highest resolution data that's going to be released to the public in order to curb privacy concerns. So many times whenever you're looking at maps that use census data, they're deriving that data from census tracts. Census tracts are defined by the United States Census, and they're designed to be relatively homogeneous in population characteristics. They're trying to make neighborhoods that are about the same size and also same kind of characteristics, so then the averaging of the people in those neighborhoods isn't lost. The average census tract is about 4,000 people. They are made up of counties, and so normally when you want to access census tracts, you're going to have to define which county you want. And then of course the counties are made up by states, and the states are made into divisions, census divisions, and regions, and then you finally have the nation. What's interesting about this line of aggregation from nation, regions, divisions, states, counties, census tracts, block groups, of blocks, there is, for example, one block can only be in one block group. There's no blocks that are in two different block groups. So a nation is divided up into regions, which is divided up into divisions, which is divided up into states, which is finally divided into counties, and that's divided into census tracts. So you'll never have a census tract that's in more than one county. And then same thing with block groups and blocks. For reporting information, the census will divide things up into zip codes, congressional districts, school districts. These are all great for reporting, but normally if you want to have the highest resolution data you're going to be looking at the census tracts. So let's run through what this looks like. So of course we have the highest unit of aggregation, which is the nation. So if you go to the census web, you can see a counter going through with the population clock, and you can see that right now there's 321 million people in the United States. This is the highest aggregation of data that you're going to get, and on the national scale. Then, of course, they aggregate everything up to the state level. So you can go on the census and get quick facts about any. And so, like, here's like the quick facts website. So if I go, for example, to Texas, I can get quick facts about how big Texas is, what population, what's the population size. Also, like things like the racial characteristics of Texas, and even educational attainment, and things like income, home ownership. So there's a lot of cool information that you can get, and you can imagine this is very valuable information. So out of that state again, you're going to have counties, and you can see how like there's no county that straddles two different states. The counties are a division of the states. And so you can see here one of the counties I'm highlighting here, Galveston County, which is where Galveston, Texas is located at, is right here, and you can get information just for Galveston. But again, you want a lot of times when you're mapping out cities, you're going to want higher resolution than just state or county. That's when you're going to start moving to the tracts. And so you can see here in the track. The track here is representing just a small portion of the county. And then, of course, there's no census tracts are going to be, for example, in Harris County, where Houston's located, or there's going to be one or the other. And after the track, you're going to have the block group. And so you can see that same track, when I zoom into it, it's made up into block groups. And here you have your block group. This is where you're not going to normally typically get census demographic information. From here down, you'll start only getting population counts, which is a little bit different. This again is to protect privacy. But then that block group then is going to, of course, be made up into different blocks. And so blocks can be actually very high resolution, because you have is typically just encompassing what you would normally say a block is. So go one block this way down the street, one block. And so there might be, sometimes just 20 households in that block. And then you finally have the household level, and this is where the census data is collected at, but then aggregated up through the rest of the geographic units. So things to remember is that the census tract is going to be typically the highest resolution of socioeconomic data that you'll get from the census. The highest resolution population count data you're going to get is going to be on the block level. And then finally, just remember that census does collect information on the household level, not on the individual level. So they know the United States government has a table that says how many people live in each house. That's given through that form that everyone fills out through their mail. Remember that typically there's about 4,000 people in a census tract. But one thing that you're going to want to remember is that census boundaries and tracts, since they're defined by the census to try to keep things as high as resolution without violating privacy, they're going to want to divide up census tracts and change their sizes for every decade. So whatever decade that you're looking at, the census tracts are going to be completely different now. To look at that, we're going to look at here, for example, a 1970 census tract. And so we can see here the census might have defined this area in 1970, and it doesn't have a lot of development in it at the moment. And you can see there's about 4,000, let's say there's about 4,000 people. But as the decades go on, more people move in, you start getting some extra development, and then the census in 1980 is going to divide that census tract into two pieces, or sometimes even redraw the whole census map. And so this is going to cause issues if you wanted to compare 1970 and 1980. You can't just compare them directly with each other because they're going to have two different census tract maps, and that's where you're getting the data from. 1990, you're going to see the same thing. So maybe as counties don't change very much every decade, census tracts are going to be changing constantly, census block groups and blocks also. And so the summary there is that you're going to, for each decade, you're going to have to look at an analysis that takes in particular concern what decade you're collecting the data on. If you're collecting data for 2000, you're going to have to use maps for census tracts in 2000. And also, if you're starting to compare maps between 1990 and 2000, you need to remember that census data is going to be collected at completely different regions. So you have a lot of possibility of modifiable area unit problems because tracts are going to be changing sizes and shapes every decade. So it makes change analysis a little bit as well. So just remember that census tracts are going to be changing every year when you're working with your census. But basically that's the foundation of the census maps, is these census tracts. That's what people are using. Even though the data is collected on the household level and then aggregates to blocks and block groups, census tracts are going to be the highest resolution that you're going to be able to work with. And so a lot of times whenever you're looking at maps, they're actually deriving them from census tracts. There are a few exceptions. Sometimes race is going to be released at the block level because of all the different types of gerrymandering that happens. So they'll release race to let advocacy groups look at potential congressional maps to see if they disproportionately impacts races or not. But there's a great map that's developed out of the census data and out of the Cooper Center in University of Virginia, and this is the race dot map. And even though they're showing dots which are supposed to represent each individual person, remember that the census never collected information on each individual person. What they actually collected information on was on the households. And so because the data was collected at the household level, just you have to remember there's some limitations there, but then was aggregated up before it was even released. And so whenever you're looking at these kind of cool dot maps that are showing one dot equals one person, the counts are correct, but where the dot locations are being simulated by block levels. And so there's actually areas where there's boundaries for blocks, and you can kind of see it with the way some of these blocks, you can see lines here. That is because that would be the block that was being represented. And one thing that's really amazing though with these maps is that even though it's looking at block level data, you can still see the amazing amount of segregation that exists in the United States. So for example, here is Houston, Texas, and we zoom in on Houston, and you can see a very separated neighborhoods where you have highly white neighborhoods. Here is highly Hispanic neighborhoods, highly African American neighborhoods, and so you are getting actually very contrasting colors, which is very amazing to see in almost every single metropolitan area in the United States. But this map, just remember, even though they are using a model, using kind of an algorithm to show one dot equals one person, that location, the information is actually collected at the household level and then aggregated up to the block level to be released. And so actually the highest resolution you're going to see here is going to be block level, but these dot maps are pretty impressive. But like these dot maps, like all other census maps, there are some limitations, but it typically is the best information available to cartographers for making maps.